In this video, I'll explain how MSE's blending system works. As an overview, it takes 8 different variants of a particular element on the card. Here we have the card background. These 8 elements being the 5 base colors, as well as artifact, colorless, and multicolored. And then it automatically produces from these 8 variants all the possible combinations that are offered by this menu. So for example, if I want a 2-color hybrid card, it'll automatically blend the white and blue cards. If I want a multicolored radial 3-colored cards, you can see the pin lines are blended in a radial fashion, and it has this multicolored part. All that is handled automatically by the blend code. So this code has the potential to save you a lot of time when you're creating templates. Inside a template file like this one, the blend code is invoked using this color background function. This function expects 3 parameters: input, type, and base hybrid. The input parameter says which colors we need to blend. The type parameter says which element on the card we want to blend. And the base hybrid parameter says how we're going to blend it. The input parameter should be the value of a field that is like the field card color. So a field like this. Its value is the list of choices that the user made, separated by commas. So for example, the value currently in this field would be white, blue, red, multicolor, radial. That's what this color background expects as an input. Now, normally it will always come from the field card color, but in some situations it could come from the field card color 2 or a more complicated field. But it always needs to have this kind of format. Once this function is called, it will process this input in some way. In which way? Well, I'll simplify a bit, but basically it will split the input into multiple different inputs that all consist of a single letter, the first letter of each of the colors. So for example, if I call it with the value we just saw, white, blue, red, multicolor, radial, then the input will get split into 3 inputs: W, U, and R, for the 3 colors that make it up. Once it's done that, it will then call this template function with each of those inputs. So the W, the U, and the R. This template function will then build paths that will allow the blending system to find the different elements it needs to create the final blend. So let's take an example. Imagine I call this color background function with this input and with the type card. It's going to process the input and arrive at 3 new inputs. This is going to result in 3 calls to this template function. I'll take this and paste it here so I can write out the 3 calls. The first call will be with input equal to W, and type will always be equal to card. Then the second input will be the same, but with U here, and the third input with R. Okay, let's focus on this call here. It first says look inside the template prefix map, which is defined here, and get me the value card. So here is the key card, here is the value card. So this part of the function will return this. Okay, so I'm just gonna write it here, card. Then we have this is never gonna change. It's just one letter. Then it says, look at the template suffix map, which is here, and give me the value of card. And so it's gonna look, here this is the key card, here we have the value of card, and so it's gonna add this. Okay, so this is going to be the result of this code execution. I can rewrite this as so, which will be easier by just concatenating the strings, because that's what the plus operator does here. And so this is the final result, which is a path that will tell me where I need to find the elements that I need to blend. This path always starts in the template folder of the template that's currently making the call. So it's saying first locate the card subfolder. That's what the slash is, represents subfolders. So look inside the template folder, identify the card subfolder, go inside it, then inside that find the wcard.png file, which is this one. So this call to the template function identified this file as being one of the base ingredients we're gonna need for our blend. And of course, there'll be two other calls, one with a U here and one with an R here. And so these will identify these three files all in all. So these are the three files that we're gonna blend. Once we've determined what we're gonna blend, we now need to know how we're gonna blend it. And so that's gonna be the job of this base hybrid parameter. This base hybrid parameter is actually a huge table that looks like this. It has entries for all the different possibilities. So for example, this square here will say what happens if the blending mode is horizontal and we have two colors that need blending. So that would correspond to me selecting exactly two colors from the colors available and selecting the horizontal mode from the four possible modes. So each of these cells will then contain the instructions for how to blend in this particular case. The strength of the blending system comes from the fact that these tables have already been filled in by very smart people who looked at how normal magic cards are blended by Wizards of the Coast. And so we can just call their tables and we don't have to rewrite them from scratch every time. These tables are defined in the following file: data folder, magicblends.mse include, new blends. Starting on line 67 or so, and going down all the way to line 816. They contain tables for the power and toughness box, for the color indicator dot, and leveler frames, all sorts of things. In this video, we'll concentrate on one of these tables called Card Hybrid, which is by far the most useful because it's the one that blends the basic card background images. So these images here. It starts off by defining this thing. So this thing corresponds to this square here, horizontal, two colors. How does it work? It creates a linear blend. Linear blends are the simplest kinds of blends. They require two images, image 1 and image 2, and then they require 2 points on the image from which a gradient will be formed. Here, the first point is at coordinates 0.40, and these are in percentages, so it's 40% of the width, 0% of the height, so that would correspond to this point here. You can see it's 40% of the way to the width and 0% of the height. Then the second point is also on top of the image, but this time at 60%. So it'll be this point here. Then the linear blend creates a line between these two and creates a gradient perpendicular to that line. It's going to then use this as a mask to blend the two colors. So let's imagine our two colors are green and blue. What this is going to do is, for this entire part here, the pixels will be black, and so this will correspond to taking pixels from the green frame. Then for this entire part, the pixels will be white, which will correspond to take pixels from the blue frame. And then in the middle, we'll take a mix of the two. So it'll do the average of the color of the two pixels. And so the result will look like this. On the right half, it'll be completely blue. On the left half, it'll be completely green. And then there'll be this gradient in the middle where it's smoothly transitioning from one color to the other. Now, if I were to change these points, for example, put them at 0, 0 and 0.5, 0.5, this would correspond to the following 2 points. The first one has coordinates 0, 0, so that would be on the top left. Then the second point would have coordinates 0.5, 0.5. So that would correspond to the center point of the image. And so the linear blend function would create, again, a line between the two, and then make a gradient that's perpendicular to that line. And so if I apply this linear blend to my green and blue frame, the result would look like this. It would be green in the top left corner, because that's where the black pixels are, and then very quickly it would transition to blue, and almost all the rest of the frame would be blue. So that's how the linear blend function operates, and by observing Canon cards, we notice that Wizards uses these values, meaning that the first 40% of the card is from the first color. Then there is essentially a transition gradient for the middle 20%, and then the final 40% are the other color. After defining this, we move on to this beast. This corresponds to this entire row here. You can see it's a map that has entries for each of the numbers, which correspond to the number of colors on the card. You'll notice that in slot 2, we just have card hybrid 2, which is the thing we just looked at. So this is actually defined outside of this entire array. Now, for number 1, we have only template colors 0. This would correspond to this cell here, and it's basically simply calling the template function, because there's no blending that needs to be done since there is only one color. So all we really need to do is go load the correct file. After that, let's look at the code for 3 colors. So it's a linear blend again, and the image 1 is similar to what we had before. The dots are also similar to that, but the image 2 is itself another linear blend. So how would that work? Well, first it's going to perform this linear blend with these points. So this would correspond to this mask, where the points is at 0.6 and then 0.78%. And it would first blend 2 colors using this. So the result would look something like this, where you have the first color that's kind of offset, not blended in the center. And then this would be the result of this function call. And so it would then be fed into this first function call as the image 2. So this then here function call would actually be called on these 2 images, this one and this one, and it would be blended using this time this mask. So this part here would be used by this card, so it would take all this and just paste it on the final result, keeping the blend that we had made before, and then it would blend the rest with the green frame here. And so the end result would be something like this, where we have a 3-part blend. So that would take care of this slot here, and then the rest of the slots would be similarly defined using linear blends of linear blends of linear blends nested inside each other. Finally, we arrive at this card hybrid definition, which corresponds to the entire table. It has itself 4 entries: radial, horizontal, vertical, and overlay, which each correspond to one of the rows. And then these are then each populated with entries for each of the color counts, 1, 2, 3 to 7. The horizontal one is just referencing horizontal card hybrid, which is the monster we just saw with all the linear blends of linear blends of linear blends. And then you have the vertical entry, which is part defined here, part referencing things that are defined elsewhere in this file. And so all of this corresponds to this card hybrid that we had passed to the color background function, and which tells the blending system how we blend the things we're blending. The blending system can also add bits of the artifact, multicolored and colorless frames to an existing frame. So for example, if I have a red card that's also an artifact, the blending system knows that it has to add this artifact border right here. But it also knows that, for example, the type line should stay red. And the way it knows this is through these artifact blend files. So right now we're looking at the card, so the relevant file is the artifact blend card. So if I open this with GIMP, you'll see that it looks like this. And what this says is the color parts of the card should be the white pixels, and the artifact part of the frame should be the black pixels. And so once it's done doing all the blending that we saw just before, it'll do an extra step where it'll blend the result with the artifact frame using this mask and saying, okay, the black pixels are where the artifact frame goes, and the white pixels are where the blended frame goes. So for example, if I take these pixels here and I turn them white, then overwrite this file. In MSE, if I reload the data, suddenly there's a part of the frame that becomes red. And so similarly, you'll also have these hybrid blend files and multicolor blend files, which determine which parts of the image become gold, or which part of the image become colorless in case of hybrid. If I go, for example, red-green hybrid, and in mainframe, if I go here, say hybrid name, if I choose gray, then the name line becomes gray, and the way it knows which part of the frame should become gray is using the hybrid blend card file. And so for each different type that your template will be calling the blending system for, your template folder needs to contain these files. So one multicolor blend file, one artifact blend file, and one hybrid blend file for each of the types. These files must have the same dimensions as the element that they're blending. So here, this one is blending the card. The card is taking up the entire 375 by 523 pixels of the template. And so this file must also be 375 by 523. If you don't want to actually use these, then just leave these files completely white, but these files must exist or MSE will not be happy. Okay, so we've explained each of the different parts of the blending system. So now let's go over a typical call to this system from A to Z to see how it all fits together. So on my template, I have this crown field, which is calling the blending system on the type crown, passing it the card color, and using the card hybrid that we just saw. So this method here is defined in the new blends on line 822. So it starts off doing a bit of processing on the input, which is card.cardColor, if you remember. And then it's going to start reading off things to cache some information into temporary variables. So first of all, it's going to look, does the input contain land? So here you don't see input written anywhere, but remember that input is implicitly passed to functions. So this is actually the same as this. Input is secretly passed as a parameter to this function. And also, let's not forget that in the current context, input is this. So this is actually also equivalent to this. So this function is saying, okay, look at the field card.cardColor. Is the choice land selected in this field? And it will store this response here in land. So land is now a Boolean that contains the value yes or no, depending on if the land option was selected inside the field card color. So this option here. It's going to do similar checks for multicolored, hybrid, and artifact. And then it's going to extract the colors. So for each of the 5 colors, it's going to look if this color is present in the field. And inside this variable colors, it's going to store the different letters that it finds. So let's assume for this entire example that we're calling the blending system with a red-green card. Then in that case, the value that will be stored in colors at the end of this will be red-green. Okay. It'll be a string that contains 2 letters, R and G. Then it'll do some additional processing, like for example, if we've chosen reversed, then it'll reverse the order of the letters in the colors variable. This corresponds to if we've chosen this option here, which switches the order of the colors. And then it'll make a note of how many colors there are and which mode we're interested in, horizontal, vertical, overlay, or radial. Once it's gathered all this information, it'll call this next function, which will handle the effective blending. This little inconspicuous line is where almost all the magic happens. So it's looking up inside the base hybrid table, which, if you remember, was this huge table of behaviors that we had built up before. And then it's going to look up the shape row. So in our example, it'll be the horizontal row, so this row here. Then within this row, it's going to look up the color count column. So in our example, the color count is 2. So we'll go in this column. And so it'll find in this square some behavior, some function that it's then going to execute. This is what these little parentheses mean. It means execute the code. And this is going to be stored inside the base variable. So let's look at what this execution entails. We are looking up inside the base hybrid table. The base hybrid table was given to us by the field that called the blending system. It passed on card hybrid. And in that table, we'll be looking at the shape horizontal and the color count 2. So let's find card hybrid. You'll be familiar with it. We defined it previously. It was this thing here. this monster here. Now, inside this map, we'll look at the horizontal entry. Horizontal entry was horizontal card hybrid, which was itself defined here, itself a rowdy beast. And then inside this map, we were looking for the entry number 2, which is card hybrid, which was defined here, which was the first thing we looked at inside this new blends file. So now we have to execute this code. This code is a linear blend, so the first thing we need to do is go fetch image 1. How do we do that? Well, by executing this code here. This code says run the function template on colors 0. So if you remember, colors was defined here. It's a string that contains R and G in our case. So color 0 is just the letter R. Okay, it's the first letter in this string. And so we're going to call this template function with the input being the letter R. So this template function is itself defined in the style file. We had defined it here, if you remember. And so what does it do? It first looks up the template prefix map, this time with the type crown, because it was the crown field that was calling it. And so it first creates this, right? Then comes the input. The input was the letter R, okay, because it was color 0. And then it goes and fetches the template suffix for crown, which is crown.png. And so the final result is this crown/rcrown.png. So that's the path that we have to take starting from the template folder to find the file that we want. And so we go in the template folder under the crown, we take this. Okay, so this image here is the one that's going to be used as image 1 for our linear blend. Then image 2 will be similar, but it's looking at colors 1, so that's the second letter in the color string. So it was G. So basically everything we did before, but this time it's going to be fetching this file here, and then it's going to be linear blending them with these points, which are the base points. So that's going to be the result of this call here. Right. This is basically the meat and potatoes. And so it's going to be stored inside base. Once that's done, we're almost finished. It's just going to do a few more checks here to know if it has to further blend the result with the multicolored, the artifact, or the colorless frame. And then it's going to return the result. This result will then be given to the crowns field, which called the blending system in the first place, and the crown field will use this as its image. Finally, the last thing I'd like to address is, what if your template has some special blending needs, like this template here that needs to look like it's two ink stains mixing together? You may already have made this amazing mask that achieves this effect, but if you use the blending system is going to use this default mask here, and so the result is going to look like this. It's just going to be a smooth transition between the two colors when you really like it to be like this. And so, how would you go about modifying as little as possible to achieve this? So, unfortunately, you're going to have to modify the whole card hybrid variable, which, if you remember, was this whole table. But in reality, you only want to modify this part here. And so, how do you do it without changing the rest? Well, you'd go about it like this. First, you redefine this card hybrid 2, which is this this square here. So you can see here I've defined it as a masked blend, which is sort of like a linear blend, but I'm giving the mask since I've already made this mask. I can just use it as is. And then I'm going to insert this newly defined card hybrid 2 into the horizontal card hybrid. So the horizontal card hybrid was this row, if you remember. And so now I'm going to have to redefine it. And how will I redefine it? Well, I'm going to say the 0th entry was whatever was in card hybrid 0. So basically, the 0th entry was whatever it was before. So no changes there. Then, same for the first entry. The only entry that's going to change is this one, which I'll replace with the new definition that I just made here. And then all the other ones are just going to take on their previous values. So basically, I'll have redefined this entire row by saying just use this entire row, but except for this part here where you're going to use the new definition I gave you. And then finally, we redefine the card hybrid field, that is the entire table. And to do that, we say, okay, so the radial row will be whatever was in card hybrid radial row. So basically we're saying, okay, this radial row will be replaced by whatever it was before. And then same thing for the overlay and vertical rows. And the only one that's going to change is this horizontal one, which will be replaced by this newly one that I made. And that way I've basically redefined the entire table of behaviors by just saying just use whatever it was before except for this square here. Alright, if you have further questions on the blending system, you can ask them in the comments below or ping me on Discord. See ya.